There he is.
Hello. Can you see me and hear me okay?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for jumping on. I hope this wasn't
Yeah.
too complicated.
No, I got to update an app that I didn't know I had.
Oh, I probably should have told you it was on YouTube because you know what? Whenever I go live, people can actually interact and ask you questions, but I don't know if you can hear me okay. Otherwise, we can just do a Zoom thing. It's totally fine. Whatever works
No,
for
I
you.
can hear you fine.
Yo, so before we start, I do have like a little bit of a YouTube audience. I should introduce you. So Paul Moomjean is a comedian here in Los Angeles. He tours, but he has such an interesting background because I met you casually over a dinner. I think we were just both at. But when I talked to you, I was like, this guy knows his comedy. And a lot of people don't know their comedy, but you actually understood the business of it, like the LA dynamics. And the further I've talked to you, I've learned that you also have this way interesting backstory to who you are and how you come. And we've kind of had these philosophical talks on IG about just the motion of like where we are in life. So, I just want to ask you: was comedy always on the goal of where you are right now in your life?
So it's very funny. I used to watch comedy specials as a kid,
Yeah.
like like HBO, like when I was like 12, 11. My grandma had one of those illegal black boxes where you could get free cable, and she and my grandpa would record Carlin, the Wayans brothers, all those specials, and then give them to me, and I'd watch them in my room. And I would go to Borders and Barnes and Noble and Walden Books and get all the cassette tapes of all the comics. So I've always been a student of stand-up comedy. And to give you kind of an understanding of where my comedy sensibilities are, my favorite comedian as a kid was Albert Brooks.
Sure.
That's maybe Andy Kaufman, but Andy Kaufman really didn't do stand up,
Yeah.
whereas Albert Brooks was doing impressions of bad stand up. That was Albert Brooks's introduction. I think that's how I learned what comedy was by watching him make fun of ventriloquists, musical comics, mimes. Uh, he made fun of all these hacky acts. So what was interesting is I knew what a hack was because I realized immediately that's who Albert Brooks was making fun of. That changes how you view comedy because most people like certain comics because they made them laugh and they never think about why am I laughing at this? Right? Like when there's a terrible comedian and there are terrible successful comedians, when they get big laughs, you have to ask yourself, what is the IQ of the people in the room? Because if you can just say, and then I farted on her face, or something really racist, and everyone just laughs, well, that's a hack. And on top of that, having Albert Brooks point that out to me at 11, 12, 13 years old really helped me realize, okay, who's really funny? Who really has a strong point of view? And all of a sudden you start to realize, oh, certain comics are better at this than others. And so it took that weird deconstruction route for me to start doing that. When I was 18, I found out I had to be 21 to go to most clubs to do open mics. So I started coaching wrestling instead, and I didn't start doing comedy until 32.
Hmm. It, when you say Albert Brooks, like right off the bat, I'm thinking, okay, so you automatically see comedy very differently because most guys will say, oh, Richard Pryor or George Carlin, but Albert Brooks is a very eclectic taste. Like, he's famous back then, but I don't think people know today, like, the influence he's had on stand-up. But just to give people a backstory, I know we got some viewers already. Like Paul's done dry bar specials. He's touring. He's worked for high-level execs, which I hope we can get into a little bit. But so but right now, what I like most about your career is like there's kind of a shit show in LA right now of a comedy, just in general in America. But you've taken this traditional route of, hey, I'm gonna work the road, I'm gonna work the casinos, I'm going to get better as a comic, and you seem to be doing that. I mean, having a dry bar special, working clean, is not an easy task. So you started late. Were all your experiences formative? Do you think like having a later start, because 32 wasn't, 18 Prodigy, would that help your comedy?
It helped my identity,
Hmm.
right? Because what does an 18 to 22-year-old know about themselves? Like nothing. So if you're a prodigy, it's because, Albert Brooks was a prodigy. Carl Reiner called him a prodigy on the Tonight Show. Said the funniest kid in the world is a 16-year-old in my living room. It was Rob Reiner's best friend. But here's the thing. I was always the funny kid in class. I was the funny teacher. I was the funny guy at work. I'm the one that made the meetings worth going to because I could ask silly questions and I knew how to make jokes, you know. But translating that to stage is different, as we both know, right? Because Bill Burr once said the funniest guy in the world probably works in a warehouse somewhere, makes people laugh all day, but couldn't do stand up to save his life. Um, but when I was 32 years old, I already had a life, and I had worked at Nickelodeon, which I know you want to talk about. So I understood working with joke writers what basic structure was, like how to get to a joke very quickly, how to get to a punchline. I understood all the basic elements of joke writing, and I understood brevity, pausing, and timing. So I started hosting big shows at Flappers 6 months in. They had me host for Burt Kreischer and Tom Segura within my first 4 or 5 months. So they trusted me to do 10 minutes in front of their wild crowds. And it was because as a host, I could work clean and I had a good sense of joke structure. Were the sets great? Not particularly. But here's the other thing too that helped me amongst over all the young kids. So many young kids, when they get a big break and they get to work with a big headliner, you want to know what they do first? They try to get on their podcast. They try to see if they can open for them more often. They're trying to add them on Instagram and Facebook immediately. I was like, look, these guys are so famous. I don't offer anything. So I'm just going to do my job and move on because even if they gave me an opportunity, I wouldn't know what to do with it 4 or 5 months in. And so the comedy club flappers actually trusted me. The old booker, Richie Lease, told me one time, he said, I could trust you with big names the way I couldn't trust other people who were starving to get in front of big names. So that helped a lot too. But I was an adult. I was 32 years old. I already was teaching for many, many years. I had been teaching on and off since 2003. I worked at Nickelodeon. I worked with some big names in Nickelodeon.
Yeah.
Like I was when I meet a comedy writer, I've been in a comedy writer's room. I'm not intimidated or I don't feel I need to prove anything, which helps a lot. We naturally become friends much faster.
Dude, you know what? I know a lot of. I've been doing comedy a long time, and I know like a lot of comics. But what I think what gravitated me toward your stuff was your newsletter. Like, you're a really good writer, and I hope people watching this. We got some people already saying some stuff, but your newsletter, you gotta check out his newsletter, man, because he does not hold back, and I really appreciate that because I feel like that it almost signifies how diverse you got to be in this oversaturated landscape, and you've got these different weapons. So check out his newsletter because he writes about comedy and just puts it through his filter. And I think your age benefits you because you've gone through these experiences and you broke down the LA comedy landscape just with no impunity. Like, you didn't give a shit, which is kind of refreshing. I kind of like. I mean, you burned your own bridges, but I feel like you know what you're doing, what you want to do. But it's
Well,
refreshing. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, but here's the thing. There's no such thing as burning bridges. That's made up in people's head.
Yeah.
It's I'm going to use some aggressive language. It's a servant mentality. It's you thinking that the comedy club owes you, or you owe the comedy club. I'm sorry, but the comedy club, the minute you become famous after trashing them on Joe Rogan's podcast, will take you in. The comedy club has no soul. The comedy club has no heart. The comedy club is a business. And keep in mind, let's not forget how many comedy clubs burned the bridge with comics when they didn't give up and coming comics who deserve spots, better spots. Think about how many comics they said, bring 5 people or we won't book you, or you don't sell enough tickets. And then that person wins a Golden Globe for best comedy series, and suddenly that person isn't going to be available for them anymore. So who burnt the bridge there? Because too often we think of it as we have to serve the comedy club. The comedy club will fall apart as soon as the comics realize they don't have to be there. And comedy clubs are falling apart all over the country because they run a bringer model, they mistreat employees. The HBO documentary on Nickelodeon, you could do 10 on comedy clubs.
Dude, I feel like if this was like the 1500s, you'd be like Martin Luther, like nailing like things against the
Yes.
wall. Like
Yes.
you're like a man out of time, like in the because dude, it's not just LA comedy though. It's like because I started in New York and it's everywhere, man. Like that's always been the power dynamic. And now because of podcasting, now we have multimillionaire comics flying on private jets and things. Like it's shifted the dynamic, but that power is always going to be there, especially in this oversaturated market filled with TikTokers and 20-year-olds.
But okay, so yes. Are you familiar with the Kill Tony show?
Of course.
Okay. So Hans Kim was on a financial audit show recently. So he was talking about how much money he makes, and he's making $300,000 a year.
Yeah.
Doing about 30 weeks at 10 grand. I mean, he openly admitted this, so I'm not giving anything away. You could watch it. It's on Caleb Hammer's special. And it's a great insight for people who are trying to figure out, A, how many comedians are unfamiliar with how they're making their money. He has an agent doing it. So think about how many people leave money on the table that the comedy club should have been giving to them when they could have got more, right? Here's the thing about comedy clubs, TikTokers, all these things. They're all doing door deals. It's not like the comedy club is making them famous. They got famous on their own. This is not 1991. You are not Richard Jenny. You do not need 30 spots a week and hope that you like literally grassroots a fan club, right? If you're putting in the work or you have the act that the club needs to sell because they have a demographic, right? You're the valuable entity. And it's not entitlement. It's just a very truthful way of looking at what's actually going on out there. And
If
too
you
many
can draw,
comics.
if you can
What?
draw, Paul, if you can draw an audience, but if you can't
If you can
draw,
draw an audience, but also keep in mind sometimes the comedy club, they need a particular type of act. Like they can't just put anyone up there, right? Like we've all done little bar shows where it doesn't matter who the comic is, the audience patiently sits there drunk and it's whatever. But if you think about how many clubs are like, we want a certain quality of comedian. Well, if you can be that quality, even if you don't have a fan base, they still need you more. And that has to be the mindset. No one ever won a war thinking, I hope the other side's okay. Like, that's not a mentality. That's just not a mentality. You have to think in really terms of like, I am going out to do what's best for me. And I want to make sure the club is sustainable. I don't want to suck up all their profits. But you have to look at it and say, they do need me. And if you don't have that attitude, you will not make it or you will get sucked up and spit out. And if you want to think about how many artists are suicidal, they go kind of down a rabbit hole of drugs and alcohol. It's because they thought the club needed them or in a way that was unhealthy. Or I need the club or I need to be on. No, no. You have to have a mindset that says, I'm doing this for me. And if the club benefits, great. But I'm going to look out for myself because this is a business. And I have to look out for my act and my brand and all of those other aspects. And most people don't. Most people are begging for spots and they're losing their dignity in the process.
Paul, tell me if I'm wrong here, but just talking to you, it sounds like there's almost two worlds of comedy. There's the ecosystem of you're a draw like Hans Kim, and you're making. Oh, did I lose you, Paul? I think I lost Paul. Paul, well, I guess we're gonna reconnect, but let me jump back on in a sec. Maybe we'll jump back on with us. Hold on. Thanks for all these comments. It's so funny. You are a Rex, John. Hey, thanks. I got that. Appreciate you. There he is. Sorry, Paul.
No, someone tried to call me on my phone and it just became a problem. So what was your question again? There's like two things.
No, no, just listening you speak, and you tell me if I'm wrong here. Like, there's almost two ecosystems with comedy. There's being a draw like Hans Kim, which is we get it. Like the clubs are trying to placate you and get you, and then there's the other world where you're being the best version of yourself, which explains to me why you're able to do casinos. You're versatile. You're doing dry bar specials, which is a big deal. Like you're being the best version of yourself as a comedian, which is almost like the old school way of doing comedy before social media came about, right? You just became the best version of yourself. Is that fair to say? There's two things,
Yeah.
two ways to approach this,
Yeah. You can either be a draw or you can be a quality act.
and perhaps
You
become a draw from that.
you could be both. Clearly, you can be both. I mean, Jim Gaffigan is both. Jerry Seinfeld is both. Um, but when I think about all of the working comics I met on my way up, they weren't draws. They were just really solid headliners with a great 45 to 60-minute show. And that was the goal because look, fame is so fleeting and it's so temperamental and there's so much luck involved. You don't hard work your way into fame. I'm sorry. You just don't. I just saw Sydney Sweeney at a Q&A. She's 26 years old. She's doing everything. She's 26. Name one other 26-year-old at a company who becomes the number one person in the company. Okay? It's a weird thing. She put herself with the right people, right time, and it just worked out. There's a lot of 26-year-old beautiful women actresses who work just as hard who didn't make it. So it's a luck thing when it comes to the fame part. It becomes a luck thing. There are plenty of dude bro comedians at every open mic. But nobody's following them because they didn't get the algorithm to snatch them up for a minute. If you don't accept the luck factor, then you're really going to do is you're going to be running yourself ragged. But the act, having a quality act that somebody can actually book and give $2,000 a week to, that's how you're going to be a sustainable business person in the comedy world. You have a quality act, you work on your jokes, you're not afraid to take some risks, you treat people with dignity and kindness. You do all of the things you're supposed to do. Every headliner who isn't famous is the nicest person I ever met. Do you feel the same way? Like a lot of headliners who aren't famous, they're just
Yeah, sure.
they are so kind. They
Yeah,
are so giving.
I agree.
Yeah. The headliners who kind of made it overnight or whatever, some of them can be prickly. Some of them are great, some of them aren't. But every long lasting comedian who doesn't have more than 1,000 followers on Instagram, but is a great comic, you wish that was your dad. You wish that was your uncle because they're so great. Or your aunt. They're all wonderful. It's and that's the key to this. You treat people well. You don't get into the muck too much. You don't create alliances. When I wrote the article about the comedy clubs, I didn't write a single thing that wasn't true. What I was writing was, if you think you're going to go to the Comedy Store and get found, it's not happening. You know what? I hope less people showed up at the Comedy Store potluck, because I think the Comedy Store is probably overwhelmed with how many people are trying to get in. I couldn't imagine. I had a comedian who's passed the Comedy Store who once wrote a DM to me about that article. And he said, I do not envy anybody who has to try to book, you know, 500 comedians a week and there's only 80 spots. Like, that's not a fun job. So the more people, 1,000 bar shows and casinos and corporate gigs, you can make more money, have more fun. I just did an 800 seat theater in Minnesota. Okay. 800 people laughed and had a ball. And that's about as far away from Los Angeles as it gets. So you don't have to be in LA and thriving to have a great, time in comedy or a successful career.
Yeah. Again, follow Paul Moomjean on Instagram. Check out his newsletter, because I felt like that blog you wrote about the comedy clubs. It wasn't more so an attack on the clubs, but just about the landscape of comedy, of like how to, be a better person as a comedian, which I just feel like is lost nowadays in comedy. Like, you just get so beaten down and you're like, well, what's the point of this? Because there's like, it's gone out the window. Godfrey, I don't know Godfrey or not. He just did this great
Yeah.
podcast on Club Shay Shay with Shannon Sharp. And he was talking, I don't know if you saw it or not, but he was talking how, like, in sports, like, the best person plays, but he's like, in comedy, we celebrate mediocrity. And that's just what it is. I mean, if you can accept that, then it makes it more digestible.
But we also celebrate fame. And so people like being in rooms with famous people. So you can be really funny, but let's be honest, most men think they're the funniest guy in their own life. Right? Like, you talk to any dude, and after a show, how many times have you had someone come up to you and be like, people tell me I should be a comedian all the time.
Yeah.
Okay. No, you're just a big fat guy, and people tell you that, so you shut up. Okay. I mean, I coached wrestling for years. I dealt with the big fat stupid dads. I call them that in my act. Okay. It's a very clear branding language I've chosen. But there's a lot of people who think but they know they're not famous. And so they'll go into a room with a famous person. They know that they can't be famous because there's nothing about them that's fame worthy. They don't do sketches, they can't sing, right? But they'll sit in a room with a famous person and tell everybody they were in the room with the famous person. They'll say, "Oh, I saw so and so last night." And they'll be like, "Oh, how were they?" But if you tell them I went to the comedy club and the guy was really funny, most people go, "That's great." But when you tell them the famous person's name, the other person now is engaged in the conversation.
Yeah.
Nobody ever asked me at the end of a comedy show, like a student showcase, when I first started out or when I taught some students, nobody ever asked for their names afterwards because they're not famous. Nobody cared. They were funny, they laughed, but nobody cared. So the fame part is really what's allowing people to sell 2,000, 5,000 seat theaters.
Yeah, it's almost like it comes with the territory, and it has its pros and cons. Like, I was talking to an actress, and she does not like the TMZ part, the celebritism of acting. But I was like, you make a deal with the devil if you want to do this. If you become famous and you're living in Hollywood, that comes with it, man. You're a public persona. I
Yeah.
mean, which is why I see comedians get bugged by people at clubs famous, and you're like, dude, you're on. People are buying tickets a hard dollar to see you, man. Like, that's part of the thing.
But most people want to be left alone in general, right? I mean, you've had a real job, like,
Yeah, yeah,
okay. Most day at your real job, if you're not talking to the one or two coworkers you like, you want to be left alone. And so that mindset doesn't leave. Like, no, imagine, I'm okay. Imagine at the end of your accounting shift, everybody at work comes up to you to shake your hand and take a selfie. You would hate the end of the day.
Well, that's why you charge meet and greets at the end of your accounting.
Yes, that is why they charge.
Yeah.
That's a new thing. They didn't do that back in. I mean, I remember even 10 years ago when I started, somebody did a meet and greet money, and they were like, "Can we do that?" They're like, "Sure, why not?" So, so the aspect of being famous, some people want it. Listen, some people love it. Some people love it. They love taking pictures. But you know what? A lot of comics are very quiet people. They're very socially distant. Like they loved COVID more than anyone else. Um, and so when you add an element of social awkwardness to this profession, because keep in mind, a lot of comedians when they're doing jokes, it's not necessarily a completely thought out punchline the way that like comedy writers for sitcoms do. Sometimes it's just the weird way they see the world. So you have a weird thought process. You most likely don't have much in common with these people. You don't really care that they saw you once 10 years ago,
Yeah.
at a diner and you got to like I just did a show with a pretty famous headliner on Saturday. Guy was also an NBC news personality for years. And you see people come up to him all the time saying, I saw you 15 years ago here and 20 years ago my son and your daughter did a thing at a school play and and you could just see the look on his face like, okay, thank you. Like, like I don't.
Yeah. Yeah. I always see Jamie Kennedy like walking at the high and stuff like that, and like people are always like bugging him, and you're just like you just see like this guy's like he's a nice guy, but you can tell like Jesus Christ, how many times this guy get approached, and you know part of the,
Film like Scream, just one film, and he will get for the rest of his life. And the Jamie Kennedy experience. I mean, he's got like three major fan base programming.
well also like, he was in that Malibu's Most Wanted, which was a funny comedy with Nick Swartzen, and then Tremors kind of revitalized him too. So he's had a pretty great career, and I love the fact that he keeps working on his comedy, at the haha and
Oh
stuff,
yes.
grinding it out. But that's part of Hollywood comedy. I mean, and I think everything changes, Paul. Like it's easy to say stuff, but once you're in the thick of it, it must be a different realm of fan interaction, like psychology. Like we don't really know unless we're actually living it. I've never been super famous like that, so God knows what would happen to you or me, what demons would arise if we were to experience.
So so it's funny you talk about that because I have been famous
Mm.
in other areas of my life. So when I was a wrestling coach, I was about as well known as it got. So everyone knew Paul Moomjean. I did rankings for the state. I did rankings for our section. I was very active on all of our social media accounts for interaction with parents and coaches and refs. And I did a lot of favors for people. What I found about myself, I was young, I was in my early 20s. What I found about myself was I liked the idea of helping people. And I also knew how to shake a hand, say thank you, and move on. Most people do not have any clue how to socially manage their fame. Um, as for your point, like what kind of demons would come out? Yes. Would a 22-year-old version of you probably, you know, say some things or treat people differently? But you're a over 35-year-old male. At this point, you know how to treat people. And if you were given $1 million check tomorrow, I don't think you would start hitting people. But if you got that check at 19 or 20, it could change how you respond to things. So I'm not worried about fame from that perspective, but but I'm also 42 years old. Like I know who I am, you know. Ironically, right now that right now the Powerball is $1 billion
No, wasn't
or
aware.
Mega Millions. Yeah,
No.
yeah, yeah. And I was thinking about that, and I thought this is how the difference of a 42-year-old man to a child. Okay, if I won $1 billion and I wanted to get revenge on someone, do you know what I would do? I would buy them a $3 million home. Now, you know why I would do that?
Because they got to pay taxes on it.
You got it. See, an adult understands that.
Yeah.
And they'd have to fill it with furniture that they can't afford. So, like, the mindset of an adult who finally gets some success is going to be very different than if you give it to a child. And when you give a child a lot of money, they don't know what to do with it. They become Richie Rich and they start buying, you know, giant playgrounds for their backyard. And that's what causes some of those issues to happen when a 25-year-old becomes famous overnight.
Yeah. I agree with you. I think money does accentuate the worst part of people, or maybe it accentuates the best part of people in terms of it gives you
Both.
feedback.
Yeah.
While we're on the topic of fame, you did work at Nickelodeon, which is another great blog you wrote. Was that so? Were you on the trajectory of being a writer? Was that your first goal of your love of comedy? I'm
So
going
I
to.
was yes. I majored in film at a junior college, and then I was going to transfer to UCLA. And I decided to coach wrestling instead and become a teacher. So I dropped. So luckily, all those film classes translated into just electives. But I have always loved film and television. I've watched the Oscars every year since 1991. I big fan of the Emmys, all of those things. So I always wanted to be a TV writer. I always wanted to be a screenwriter. So when I got the production assistant job at Nickelodeon, I looked for every opportunity I could to get in front of producers and writers so that they could see that I was going to bring value. What happened was is Dan Schneider needed a driver to work because he was sleeping in.
Hold on, let me stop you right there. Let's set this up for a sec. So, guys,
Okay.
right now, there's a huge documentary right now called Quiet on Set. It's about Nickelodeon. It's about all the shows of what happened. It's about sexual abuse from this guy, Brian Peck, who was his acting dialect coach, actors that come out of the woodwork. This guy, Dan Schneider, exec producer for all these amazing shows. He was an actor on that show, Head of the Class, back in the late 80s, 90s, I don't know. Went on to become this huge, I guess, kid mogul creating these shows. Now experiencing a huge backlash because all these stories have come out against Dan Schneider about how he's being a monster. And Paul was his assistant. And he writes this great blog, which you can find on his newsletter. Check it out. Go for it, Paul. And this is how you eventually became his assistant. Go.
So here's what happens. Dan needed a driver. I saw, well, why wouldn't I want to be in the car with the creator of the shows? So I offered to pick him up at his house. It was kind of on the way. So it wasn't a huge issue. I picked him up and we kind of hit it off. You know, I knew who he was from Head of the Class and Better Off Dead. And so, and I was able to ask him questions that were different than most people probably were asking him. And then it went so well that he fired his on set assistant and made me his on set assistant. Now, he knew I wanted to be a writer. They can only have 4 writers in the room. So what he did was is he offered me a high-paying producer's assistant job that allowed me to work in the writer's room as a non-staff writer. So I pitched stories, I did the write-up, so I got the whole experience of what it was like to be in the writer's room. But then also I would sit in the editing bay with him and I would sit on set with him. So we would write on set. We'd rewrite jokes. I used to pitch a lot of jokes on set that got into episodes. I pitched a lot of jokes that were in the original scripts. And I helped with edits when Dan and I would look in the editing bay. And there would be some scene, and we'd say, well, which cut's the better cut? And he would say, Paul, choose. I can't. And I go, second cut. And he would go, sure. And then we would just, so I was part of this whole process of how television was created. So, like, I understand the ins and outs of a lot of elements of television because of my job. At the same time, the job was 24/7. It's what you would call a slave labor contract. in that I was just on call the whole time and I wasn't paid properly for overtime. I ended up having to sue, and we settled very quickly because they just all realized that this was a ridiculous demand. But the way in which working with Dan worked is that he was working 3 shows at one time. It was post-production of Drake and Josh, it was the new production of iCarly, and the current production of Zoe 101. And so you put a so when I talk about, you give a 25-year-old too much money, he started at 25 making all these shows. By the time I get to him, he's 40 years old. He's been for 15 years been making millions of dollars and having everyone bend over backwards for him. So when you see the documentary and you hear about him yelling at people, and he yelled at me, and you hear about him mistreating people, one of the things that I think nobody really understands is the subtext or the deconstruction of it, which is, dude, when you tell a 25-year-old just make great TV, we don't care how you do it, you're going to get a lot of those problems. Television does not have a moral center. It has a business center. And if someone is abusive verbally, and see, if Dan wasn't abusive sexually, like he never did anything with kids that I know of. I mean, I was around and I never saw anything, and nobody else. I mean, there's too many people who worked with him for years who they would have reported him. I mean, keep in mind in the documentary, as soon as everyone found out about the other people, they were reported. With the exception of actually when they talked about going to production. And do you remember there's a part where somebody complained about Brian Peck, and the unit production manager said, "Well, you're just homophobic." I know who that person was, and that person was protecting Nickelodeon. And so when you talk about who's the problem is when you go to the production side and and you say, "Hey, this is what's happening if they don't do anything." So I don't think Dan knew what was going on because he seemed shocked when Drake told him. In fact, Drake defends him in the documentary. But when it comes to being an abusive boss on power dynamics, on language, on demoralizing behavior, Dan ate the cake. And part of me believes it's because he started at 25. Had he started at 35, it might have been a completely different situation. And it's funny in his rebuttal video, which was fully scripted, he says the same thing. Like there's things I wouldn't do then that I do now, or things I wouldn't do back then that I know now are wrong. So he had some, I mean, it wasn't a great apology, but it was still like, yeah, 25-year-old men with 13-year-old kids, he's a big kid himself. So he was only behaving in a way in which Nickelodeon rewarded him.
Yeah, and look, Paul, and I think I told you this on Instagram. Like, aside from the slave labor, which you settled, and rightfully so, you can be a dick in Hollywood. There's no rule that says you can't be an asshole. I mean, I've worked at agencies at other places. It's okay if you're making money for the company, and if you accept to work at a company as assistant and they're yelling at you, they're allowed to yell at you. I mean, you can quit and somebody else. Is it morally right? Probably not. But if you're making money for the company, some people that's how they do. When I was working in an agency, their bosses would yell at them. I'd see these kids rise, become agents, and take on the persona of their boss because they feel like that's the way they operate. It's like they're wired, like they're broken. It's like being a son of an alcoholic or something. You become an alcoholic yourself. It's like this trickle down effect.
Oh, well, it's definitely learned behavior. It's the Wolf of Wall Street, right? When Leonardo DiCaprio shows up all wide-eyed and
Right.
like he just wants to make money on Wall Street, and then after a few years he becomes a Quaalude coke addict, right?
Right.
But they all were. I think that part of the problem is that most businesses would have more moments in which they're self-reflecting on the company culture, but Hollywood is such a quick turnaround for the need of profit that they can't afford to do that. So if you're paying someone $100,000 a year to be your manager and they're being abusive, you just lost $100,000, may not destroy the business when you fire them. Whereas if you spent $1 million on an episode of television and then you're spending millions more and now you have to cancel the show, you've just lost too much money. So you're right. You can be a jerk, but if the industry was willing to have a little more backbone, people wouldn't do it. Now listen, there's a lot of wonderful producers and there are a lot of wonderful people who got very far ahead. Mel Brooks is a saint based on what everyone says. So Steven Spielberg is a saint based on what everyone says.
Yep.
People will tell, there are plenty of people who will tell you that and then there's people like Stanley Kubrick who made everyone cry.
Yep.
So, but Stanley Kubrick was considered a genius. Now, here's the thing. I love Stanley Kubrick movies as much as anybody. In fact, probably more than most because he was a little weird. But the way that he treated some of those female actresses, it doesn't matter that you're a genius. It's wrong because it's a human being. And I don't care if they're making money for people. And so me as a 42-year-old right now, I have a very different mindset. I see someone being mistreated, I stop it immediately. Like that's just done. And if I get fired in the pro, fine. But I'm not going to stand by now at 40 years old because I still think I'm going to face God one day. And he's not going to be happy when he says, well, why didn't you defend that person? Well, God, I had to make a paycheck. No. In fact, leaving the comedy club I just left, they were doing some things that I thought were really shady. And it was like, time to go. I'm not going to go. And guess what? I'm still making rent. My Wi-Fi apparently still works. I'm talking to you. Like, there is a metaphysical belief that I have that if you do what is right, God, the universe, however you want to declare it, I call it God, protects you. You will be okay. You will make it.
Yeah.
But when you continue to run your soul through the mud, you will become what you're running through. And you might be a millionaire, but let me tell you something. The most miserable people are filthy rich because they built their fortunes sometimes on the backs of other people's hard work. And I've learned this in every profession, even in education. Football coaches who cheat, and I dealt with one of those before. We always used to say, how does the guy sleep at night? We found out he didn't. Principals who change grades, how do they sleep at night? They didn't. There are plenty of people who are successful, who reach the highest levels of the mountain, and yet they don't get to enjoy a single second of it because they know how they got there. And the ones who do enjoy it are sociopaths, and they will eventually be called out. That's what 2017 was, when every sociopath got called out and they had to go through whatever scrubbing they went through on social media.
Yeah, look, I'm not saying crimes should be allowed. If you do something illegal on set, like a wine, really illegal and abuse of power, obviously that stuff. But I guess I have a opposite approach of like this nihilistic way of approach to life, where I feel like everything there is a sense of lawlessness and Hollywood. When you said there's no moral center, people capitalize on it where you can succeed and you can thrive. There's no
Oh, do you
nobody
want to know the fastest way? Fastest way to get ahead is just lie. Just lie. You can just lie all the time. We used to joke about that at a job I had where we go, oh, the marketing strategy is just lie. And
yeah.
and yes, lying is a great way to get ahead really fast. What my point is that every one of those executives, they may have slept on a really nice bed, but they didn't sleep well. And when you look at how many people's lives end in disruptive destruction, like that's the end game. No more family, no more friends, multiple spouses, massive amounts of debt, you name it, everything goes wrong. No one lives I mean, okay, so like we joke about Trump, right? And we go, "Oh, well this guy never get this man is deal with all of this." How would you like to go through 4 court cases right now? You would probably be in a, you know, mental distress. So it does come back to bite you in some way. It just doesn't. The problem is if we look at the world through an economical terms or a success terms, then we don't see all the aftermath and all of the problems that come with it. I'm looking at things from a peace angle. I want peace more than I want money. I would rather be able to watch a television show in my little one bedroom apartment, knowing that I did the best I could, than making a ton of money wondering, is anybody going to come after me tomorrow? Because I don't want to live in a Shakespeare play where everyone's trying to kill me to become the king.
Yeah. I think you can definitely choose the road you want to go down. But as you get older, for me anyway, I'm just talking about personal experience. I just don't believe like if you act a certain way, it's going to guarantee you've got to make your own choice. You got to live with your own decisions and sleep at night. And however you want to play, your cards, it's your choice. Uh,
Oh, yeah. I just truly believe that people who live a life of backstabbing and doing things are going to find themselves at a bad end.
yeah, you know what? I used to believe in that, but I just see so many people who thrive, and I see so many good people who suffer. Um, and I'm just like, wow, this is it's not just Hollywood, man. It's systemic
No.
everywhere, man.
Well, when we talk about, the sexual assault on set of Nickelodeon, right, with Brian Peck. Okay, that happens in coaching, that happens in teaching, that happens in churches. Everything happens everywhere. If there's kids, you're going to have the same problems. It doesn't matter the industry. The same thing goes with economical over like working too much, right? People who are CPAs probably work just as hard as a showrunner for The Big Bang Theory. Like every industry has the same problems. The difference is there's no camera and there's no Entertainment Weekly and there's no magazine to cover those other industries with the type of, popularity. So we see Hollywood and we see these other industries as the ultimate evil, when if you were to just go into any general marketing or real estate, oh my gosh, have you ever met realtors? These people are insane. Like, you have to be scum of the earth to tell someone who makes 4,000 a month they qualify for a $3,000 mortgage.
Yeah.
Bankers, bankers, scum. I'm going to sound like George Carlin here. This is what George Carlin would be saying right now. How dare we have a profession that purposely puts people in debt who could never afford the debt? So there's tons of professions where people are unethical and immoral. And guess what? They get their problems and they we've seen it happen where the businesses, Enron, all of these places, they finally get caught. Jordan Peterson has a great quote. He goes, "I've never seen anybody get away with being awful. You eventually have something happen, even if you're Hitler in the bunker. I mean, at some point, it doesn't end well because it all catches up." And I think about, again, like, what kind of life do you want at the very end? Do you want a life in which you can look at your family and friends and have a certain sense of dignity, or do you want to look at your life and say, well, I had the number one television show, but my kids don't talk to me? Yeah, I don't. That doesn't sound fun. Where you have to have six wives because you can't keep one because nobody wants to be around you.
I can see how your experiences have shaped your sense of righteousness in stand-up comedy. Like, I'm
Yeah.
more formative, but I just in terms of this TV stuff that you went through with Dan and seeing how you approach that with your stand-up comedy. I mean, it speaks to how our past finds us in some capacity. Like, there's no escape from that. So, I mean, in your case, I feel like it's benefited you because you kind of have this moral center, very
Well,
hard world
it
stand-up comedy.
yeah. Well, you go, I don't like being treated like that, so I'm not going to treat other people like that. It's not that I haven't done that. I'm sure I've been a jerk to many people, but it it becomes a conscious effort to try not to be.
Yeah.
That's clear. I've tried very hard. And when I ran the school at Flappers, I had, I think, about on and off 30 instructors. and a lot of them were women. And there's this very funny picture of me teaching a class with like 8 female instructors. And I had someone reach out to me. They said, "You don't get to that point unless they trust you." So you want to create a culture in which people feel valued and appreciated, and you're not stepping on them to do it just the way you want it. But you know, if you run a results based uh, uh, what's the word I'm looking for? If you run a results based objective, as opposed to a I'm in a position of power objective, because that's how a lot of businesses are run. That's how a lot of producers work. Like I'm in charge, so I'm just going to tell everybody what to do, as opposed to this is what needs to get done, and I'm going to honor and respect you to get it done. That to me just allows people to maintain their dignity more. So that's what I saw, I think, with Dan, was there's a lot of micromanaging, and that really I saw the effects that it has on others, and it prohibits creativity,
Yeah.
things like that.
I mean, I don't know, Dan. I think I told you I met him once on Nickelodeon audition, but he must have gone through his own, Odysseus journey as a child actor. Just going through that world, and maybe that shapes how he treated people. Because I mean, you can make that decision. Do I want to be a good producer or a bad producer? Do I want to treat people nicely? Like, who knows how these people what they've seen, like almost like victims of war, and then they're almost like just their PTSD is like just being spit out at your assistant.
So he started at like 20 years old, 21 years old.
Okay.
He wasn't a child.
Okay.
He was playing a teenager.
Okay, I don't know.
What I learned
Mm.
working with him is that what it really comes down to is he just started as a producer at such a young age,
Mm.
because him and Brian Robbins were creating All That and Keenan and Kel together. So
Brian,
if
by the way, runs Paramount now, I think, right? Doesn't he run his
right,
Yeah.
he's the head of film distribution. Like he makes the movie. Like he's the guy that's going to determine how many Top Guns we get.
Yeah.
Those two guys worked together on Head of the Class, wrote an episode together on Head of the Class. So when you hit a home run out of the gate, well, you start thinking you're a little invincible. Maybe what really happened was Dan never failed. Like, if I never fail, I'm going to start to think it really is just me.
No, you are 100%. I used to work for this actor, and I was his digital manager. But he could be a dick, and the way I just told his assistant, he hit it when he was 16, so he's always had success, and it's just changed his warped perception of how the world works. And now
he's what?
He's in his 40s. I'll tell you his name off camera. I don't know.
Great. Well, okay, so I worked for a wrestling coach. My high school wrestling coach. I coached with him for the first 6 years I coached. And he tells me a great story. He goes, his first year coaching, he has a state placer. And he goes, "Well, I'll just do this every year, right?" He goes, "I didn't have another state placer for 28 years." And he was a pretty humble guy. Like he was the most humble of successful guys. He was a college All-American, won a couple national titles as a team, great, very successful, very well respected. And what was funny is that he goes, you think you have a hit and you just assume I'm gonna do it again and again. You don't. And he goes, it takes a couple years, and then you realize, okay, I just have to kind of, stay level headed and it'll be fine. And he coached for many years and had a very good career. But when you get people who get success early and they can match it again and again, I mean, my gosh, it just
Yeah.
because you really do think it's you. And maybe it is. And I'm not denying it. I mean, Dan wrote a lot of TV. He was the David E. Kelly of TV writers. He wrote all those scripts. Okay. The writers wrote a lot of beat sheets. The writers wrote a lot of plot line ideas. Dan and at least I, for 1 year, sat in a room sometimes by ourselves, rewriting and writing all of these scripts. And he did a great job in that way. Like,
Yeah.
So he must have felt really accomplished. I mean, he's got the top 4 shows in Nickelodeon at one time, I think. I think at one time he might have had 4 shows at Nickelodeon in the top 5 with like reruns of Drake and Josh and Zoe, Victorious, and iCarly.
Yeah, I look. Whether it's Dan or any other producer, you can't deny like they've got to put in work, and I'm sure he's very
Yeah.
skilled at what he does. But getting that opportunity and carrying that momentum, I think you're in the business. You realize there's a lot of X factors that are beyond your control. And if you're fortunate enough to get in the door and you're talented, the stars have to align in some capacity for you to move forward.
Oh, well, you have to keep working.
Yeah.
You have to. You have to get up every day, And so even if you have actors or writers that keep stumbling into success, they're still going to that audition. Like they're not messing up their opportunities. So that is one element in which I would argue what separates maybe a person who has no failures is that they at least hit every opportunity. Where a lot of people just start to get lazy and they go, "Oh, I'll just not do that, or I won't do this, or I'll stay up late." And then it just kind of goes away. Nobody wants to deal with whatever drama you're bringing.
Yeah. Well, Paul, let's wrap this up, but let's end on a positive note because I feel like you do uh, have this positivity thing about you. With everything you've experienced, whenever I talk to you, you always see the like I'm always bitching about like we do a lot of the same gigs, and I'm always like, man, this gig sucks, and you're like, no, it's a great gig. Do this, do this, do this. Like, where can people find you? I know you have a dry burst special, but where can people come see you here in Los Angeles, any part of the world?
So if you go to my website, themoomabides.com, you can sign up for the newsletter. It'll pop up. And I have I'm every Saturday, more or less, in Santa Clarita at the JR's Comedy Club, which is a little back room of a Mimi's Cafe, a 50-seat theater. It's a lot of fun. You've done this show,
Yeah.
and but like I have tonight, I'll be in West Hollywood at Hamburger Mary's, and then in April, I'm going to be in Long Beach at Jade's Restaurant on the 22nd. I'm at the Carson Inn, doing I believe, 4 shows, um, 2 nights, Friday and Saturday. I'll be at, I think it's the Nugget Sparks in
Sure.
Nevada in June on the 28th and 29th. And then I'm going to be up in Oregon and Washington in the fall. Or no, I'm sorry, Washington in the summer, something like that. Yeah, but on the website I have all the dates. But I travel as much as I can, and I try to get out there as much as I can because nothing makes you better as a comic than getting in front of as many kind of audiences as possible, and just getting, in the LA scene. What most people don't realize is there's a lot of pressure to bring. So the show that I co-run with my buddy Randy at JR's, he founded it. I really have a no-bringer mentality. Like you just show up and I'm going to do all the work and I'm going to advertise and Randy's going to send the newsletter out. It's so nice to do road work because you aren't required to like text your friends the day of to make sure they're coming.
Yeah, absolutely.
I
It's
mean,
a
you recently, right?
great.
You recently did a show. How stressful was it for you compared to other shows when you're the responsible one for the
It sucks. It sucks.
Yes.
Like
It-
I mean, like honestly, like most of my friends showed up, and I was like, I felt worthless as a comedian. I was like, I should quit. Like, what am I doing? I can't draw. Like 50 people. That's like stupid.
so okay, so I'm going to tell you this. You could draw if the show had something special to it outside of just being a comedy show. And what I
Yeah.
mean by that is if it's a live taping, if you're doing maybe something a little different, like it's a one-man show, if it's right. So all of us have the capability of actually selling out Madison Square Garden. And I'm being facetious, but if you're offering something that's really special or different from what you're normally offering, because think about this. Most people are just saying, I have a show. come watch my comedy show. This lineup's killer. You're like, it's not really. And they
Mm.
know that. By the way, whenever I see a producer just be like, this is a great lineup, I always thought, like, are you honest when it's not?
Yeah.
Like, do you post, this is a mediocre lineup. It's totally not worth your $5, but it'd be really nice if you. No, the truth is we kind of lie about all the shows, but you can't lie if you're saying, I'm taping something. I have an album. I know a guy, he's a comic named Kyle. He would do this every 6 months. He would do a show in the Yoo-Hoo room, and he would record it on his phone and then sound mixer and cut it up, and he would make it into an album. But he's producing something, so he would tell his friends, I'm doing my album for iTunes." Recorded on his phone, so get 50 people to come out and support. So if you do something special, because here's the thing, when your friends have to choose between paying $50 to watch you do comedy or having lunch with you, they would just rather have lunch with you.
Yeah, no shit.
And that you can make them laugh at lunch. So that's what I'm learning is, there's all these people that I kept wanting to invite to shows. You know what I decided instead? Screw it. I'm just going to go out and have dinner and lunch with all these lovely people and let other people worry about, the bringing part.
Or do
And
you?
and my comedy mindset
Yeah.
improved dramatically.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're ending on a good note. Like at the end of the day, it's really about our, serenity now moment, right? Like we got to like live day to day and somehow find, meaning in our own lives. And
Yeah, we can't base anything on our recent success or failures. It's a track record. I always say it's better for us to view the world the way Forrest Gump did, which is a series of events that are some are positive and some are negative. And if you look at life like Forrest Gump does, your relationship life may suck, right? Because he's got Jenny and all his friends are dying, but he's also the top investor in Apple, and he runs a successful boat, shrimping boat, and he's beloved by the black church that he went to. Like, there's other components of our lives that we can find a lot of success and rest in. And if we do that, if we look at it holistically, then everything should be a way more positive experience. Because more than likely in America and probably Canada, generally speaking, life is better than it is worse
yeah,
for most people. It's just a little better than it is worse for most people. And that's just how I have to look at life. And then it's like, okay, it's a bad show. Who cares? I
yeah,
bombed on Saturday. Like, I had to just shut down hecklers the whole time. And one of the comics was like, well, how do you feel about that? I said, oh, what do I care? I got another show on Monday.
exactly. Also, you have a dry bar special too. People can find your dry bar special.
Yes. Yes, on YouTube. Just type in Paul Moomjean on YouTube, and there you go.
All right. Well, Paul, thanks for jumping on, man. I appreciate this, and you know, keep doing your thing, dude. Like I love your
Yeah.
news special. It's great. You got to sign up for it, and keep doing your thing. All right. Yeah. Great seeing you, buddy. I'll see you at the clubs, no doubt, or on Instagram.
Bye.